Is your appetite sometimes out of control? Are you unable to stop eating even when you're full? Download our new intelligent medicine video, Defensive Eating, Taming Your Addiction to Food. There's a physiological basis for food addiction. The food industry has gripped our brains using powerful food science. Find out what we can do about it. Go to drhoffman.com to download this important video. We will arm you with proven strategies to change your eating behavior forever. Go to drhoffman.com. Welcome to the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and today we're going to talk about osteoporosis, but from a very novel standpoint. We often talk about osteoporosis from the standpoint of remarkable supplements. We've critiqued some of the conventional medicines that are used for osteoporosis, but today we're going to talk about something entirely different. This is a non-supplement, medical support for bone health and for overall musculoskeletal health. Today we're going to talk to Ian Cutts. He's Vice President for Commercialization for Meradyne LivMD. This is something that I've been talking about for quite some time. Those of you who are real aficionados of intelligent medicine who followed me in my previous incarnation when my show was called Health Talk recall that, many years ago, perhaps 8, 10, or 12 years ago, I talked to the developer of the self-same technology we're going to be talking about today. He's Dr. Clinton Rubin. He's director of the Bioengineering Center at Stony Brook University here in New York. And then we were talking about pioneering research on this new technology. So here we are a dozen or so years later, and we're going to talk to Ian Cutts of Meradyne about low-intensity vibration technology. So welcome to Intelligent Medicine. Pleasure having you on board.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hoffman, and good morning to you.
Yeah, what is LivMD? What are we referring to?
Well, basically, it's a medical device that creates a low intensity vibration, which is almost analogous to a buzzing. And the way the device operates is a person stands upon it, and they're moved against gravity at quite a small distance, something like about 100 micrometers, but at a frequency of around 30 times a second. And that buzzing energy creates a biological response in musculoskeletal tissues, in particular bone. So we know from many years of research, led primarily, as you say earlier on, by Dr. Rubin and other researchers, that these signals, these mechanical signals, are highly attractive to early stage cells in the human body. So in the bone marrow, inside the long bones of the body, we have mesenchymal stem cells, and they can become fat or they can become other useful cells like muscle, bone, skin, cartilage, for example. So the bone is highly stimulated by the technology, and it creates new bone. So in any age group, this is a way of forming bone. We've also been learning in more recent years that it's quite effective at helping to maintain muscle condition. So again, as we get older and fat increases in our muscle and the muscle changes, so it doesn't have the same composition as when we get older as when we were younger. This modality is a very good way of helping to maintain a quality in the muscle, particularly in the legs, in the lower legs. And that's very, very useful for things like postural stability, helping to prevent falls, which I know are of a great worry and a serious consequence to the older population. So the low-intensity vibration is really a sort of musculoskeletal wellness technology, which is very suitable for older people, but it can also be used by other adults who are having a sort of condition that could challenge their bone. So, for example, cancer treatments, chemotherapy can be quite destructive to bone. Thalassemia, renal failure, all those conditions can have an impact on the bone itself. So this is a way of helping to maintain bone without the needs for a drug therapy. And then in young people and children, it's been shown to be a really useful way of forming bone for children that may have been born with cerebral palsy, or a condition like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, or have acquired Crohn's disease, or had cancer themselves and gone through chemotherapy, which, as we've said before, can be destructive to bone. So it's a very useful modality for youngsters to give them bone growth where they may not be getting it at their stage of life. So summarising what it is, it looks like a weighing scale. Person stands on it for around 10 minutes.
Like a bathroom scale. It's like a portable unit. Exactly. It's not a big platform, like a giant or heavy object.
No, it's roughly sort of 2 inches high, 18 by 12, weighs about 20 pounds, and creates this very low-level buzzing, which is comfortable, quite pleasant. Actually, vast majority of people are very happy with it, and it has a very useful effect on their musculoskeletal tissues.
And we know that prevention of fractures, which is the ultimate goal, really consists of a couple of components. One is, of course, bone density. And, we're fixated on bone density when we send women every couple of years for a bone density test to see if their bones show osteopenia or osteoporosis. We look at the DEXA score, the T-score, minus 2.5 or less means that you might be fracture prone. But there's more to it than that. There's also the quality of the bone, the architecture of the bone, but also there's this whole issue that you mentioned earlier, which is stability, which has to do not necessarily just with bone strength, but also with the fine muscles that offer balance and coordination.
So we've sort of followed a number of research paths, to your point, Dr. Hoffman, and over the years we've found that in the muscles in the lower legs, the fast-firing muscle fibers, which are sort of contracting at anything from 20 to 50 or 60 times a second, and which we don't really feel, they decline with age. So maybe part of what's going on in muscle and in bone in later life is a sort of a change, and the relationship obviously between the muscle and bone is very intrinsic, and bone listens to the muscle, or it senses the muscle and it responds to that. So in physics there's a law, Wolff's law, which is known as, summarized as, form follows function. So if you take away part of the relationship between the muscle and the bone, then the bone will change. And what we have seen is these vibration devices can act as almost like a surrogate to the loss of the faster firing muscle fibers, which are occurring generally in us as we get older. And really those muscle fibers are just becoming fat. So there's a sort of change in that muscle itself. So that creates a change in the stability of the individual, increases the risk of falling over. So the vibration plate is quite helpful for the quality of that muscle, particularly in the lower leg, because that is almost like a second heart. It has a very big function in return circulation. It has a very big function in stability and ambulation for the individual. So the vibration plate is very, very useful at helping to condition that muscle, also improve the bone. And there have been some clinical trials in people that have had a hip fracture where a vibration plate has been used after their surgery as part of the rehabilitation. And some interesting things have been seen. So as well as helping to improve the overall bone healing, the devices are also quite useful at sort of conditioning that muscle in both legs, so the fractured side and the unfractured side in the person that's had the fracture. And we do know with fractures in the hip that if you have one side, you're quite likely to get a second fracture later on. So this is a really useful tool in maybe the rehabilitation of people that have suffered a fracture. But more importantly, it's a very useful tool in helping to prevent the falls that caused the fractures in the first place.
Well, a couple of observations. You mentioned cerebral palsy, which is a form of neurological condition where there is not proper activation of the muscles that literally surround the bones. And in that disease, osteoporosis is very prevalent. Also, in patients with conditions like multiple sclerosis, they don't have as much muscle strength or control. And it seems that there is a relationship between the muscles and the bone, and, use it or lose it, right?
Absolutely. So, a very important part of working with a technology like this is consistency in its use. So these types of devices have been around in the sort of commercial market for maybe 10 years or so. The technology that you referenced to Dr. Rubin has gone through a couple of different companies, but there are quite a few people that have used them for long periods of time. So we find, over a sort of continuous use, over numbers of years, they're very helpful in addressing issues like the condition of the legs and the quality and the muscle in the legs, but also for women in particular who are concerned about bone loss. These aren't a sort of magic answer to the osteoporosis situation, but they do provide a stimulation of new bone formation. So there's some personal research being done by researchers in Australia. It hasn't been published in the long-term use of a vibration plate like the Maradyne, and they found that the DEXA scores almost sort of flatten, so you don't see decline. You see it almost like a maintenance of the T-score over periods of time.
Which is unusual because there's always an age-related bone loss. That's a physiological, loss of bone, just like, eyesight, hearing, and so on seem to decrease.
So this is actually a small series. It's by a lady called Belinda Beck in Australia, and she's got a control group of similar-aged women that show changes in their T-scores, more in line with what you've just suggested, Dr. Hoffman. But the vibration group they've sort of maintained a level. The published clinical data now is actually quite good. There was a study completed in Boston in very elderly people, average age of around 82. That was published this year in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research. And that was men and women of advanced age, and they used the devices over 2 years. The women that used the devices were quite improved, so their bone mineral density in their hip region was sort of gained around 10%.
It gained, which is unusual.
Yeah. So from baseline to the 24th month, there was about a 10% improvement.
Wow.
The overall trial couldn't conclude anything because the numbers were quite small, and you had a wide variety of individuals in there, male and female, some using active and some using placebo devices. But it did suggest, that this technology is safe for the older population, and it is, and particularly for the women, it's actually a helpful way of stimulating bone, which they wouldn't be doing normally. Now, there's other data in the public domain from China. Chinese University of Hong Kong has sort of followed this technology for a long time, and they did a younger group of women over 60. They looked at 700. Half the group using a vibration plate, and then the other half just doing normal exercise. They had bone improvement, but more importantly, what they showed in the vibration group was the fall rate was significantly lower, and the fractures associated to the falls were significantly lower. So that was really quite powerful data in the sort of premise that this can become a useful part of a strategy that people can use as they sort of go towards the later part of their life, in maintaining quality of musculoskeletal tissue, reducing risk from falls and the associated fractures from the falls, and in addition, putting bone in where they may not be doing that.
Right, and I can attest to those results. Although I'm not conducting a formal study, several of my patients are using this device. I was most struck by a listener who didn't do anything different, didn't take any special supplements, just got the device and just sent me rave reviews because they did have an improvement on the magnitude of several points on their subsequent bone density just from the device alone. But explain to our listeners, I mean, a lot of people will think, well, goodness, I've got to spend hours a day, standing or sitting on this device. How practical is this to implement at home?
Yeah, so I think the implementation is actually a lot easier than it would have been, say, if we were discussing this 10 years ago. So the early clinical trials were generally using a sort of 20-minute regimen. And what we've learned in the intervening years, and more recent trials have been conducted with 10-minute regimens. So the sort of, let's say, the wisdom now today would be that a daily session of use, probably 10 minutes, is sufficient to get a benefit from it, but you do need to utilize it each day. So to maintain the effect at the cellular level and within the body, there is a necessity to use it regularly. There's definitely a correlation between a certain amount of use and there's no benefit in doing more. So, for example, an hour a day isn't necessarily better than 10 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. But more recent research, which again needs to be qualified probably in clinical trials and in use, is work that Dr. Rubin's doing with periods of interruption. So maybe 3 to 5 minutes and then a latency period of sort of 3 hours and then repeat for another short period.
Like doing it in divided doses.
Yeah, absolutely, and it seems to sort of stimulate the activity at the cellular level, and then that has a benefit. It quietens down, and then you re-stimulate it. So mm-hmm. There could be an argument that, and I know quite a lot of users of these devices now already do that. They maybe do a session in the morning and a session in the afternoon. But mm-hmm. it only needs to be 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes. So it's just that you need to do it. On a regular basis. Lest
our listeners think that this is like standing on a jackhammer device, with a teeth chattering effect. It's actually, I've done this. I've sampled it. It's actually barely discernible. It's almost too subtle to believe that it's efficacious. You stand there, you do to feel a distinct vibration. It's not hard to stand on the vibrating plate. It doesn't require special balance, and you can easily be distracted listening to a podcast of intelligent medicine, or watching the TV, or reading a paper. The main thing is you got to stand. That's how it works. And there's a timer, and the timer goes off like an egg timer and tells you that stick a fork in you, you're done. Right?
Absolutely.
That's the way it works.
But we've also been learning, and I sort of made comment to this earlier on about the overall effect on the lower extremity, the muscle and the bone and the balance. We're not really fully aware of the neurological or the control elements of it, but from a musculoskeletal perspective, the plates, like a Maradyne, they're slightly unstable. So I'll just sort of preface that properly. The predecessor device which we had was very rigid, so it only moved up and down, whereas the LivMD has a slightly more unstable platform because it's mounted on springs as opposed to a sort of scissor mechanical structure which only moved it vertically. So it's a bit analogous to standing on a very firm mattress compared to standing on a concrete floor. Mm-hmm. So that means you have to work a wee bit, when you're actually on the device, and it does have some benefit on balance perception. And also some of the more sort of experienced users, and people like Sarah Meeks, who is a physical therapist and does a lot of exercise programs for older people, and particularly those with osteoporosis, they suggest that, somebody, when they're using the device, maybe knowingly changes their stance mm-hmm. whilst they're on the device, so loading the front of the feet, the heels, the left side, the right mm-hmm. side, maybe some gentle sort of yoga type moves, so that they're getting a different musculoskeletal aspect as they stand on the device, maybe more stiff, more relaxed, and that will have a greater impact than just passively standing on the platform and not really doing anything. So we're not advocating that you do weightlifting or heavy weights. It's just gentle exercises within that 10-minute session. But
shifting your stance and so what's of interest is that you don't really feel the vibrations throughout your body. As I said, it's not a teeth chattering kind of effect. The vibration is very high frequency and it's subtle. Is this as efficacious on the spine as on the hips? I could see the hips because they're closer to the vibrating platform, but is there any evidence that it also may help spinal bone density?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the early stage clinical trials, the safety and efficacy study showed improvements in the lower back, in the lumbar spine, around 2% compared to the control group. In children, there's been both femoral and spinal benefits. There was a study in Hong Kong in girls with idiopathic, adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, and they had benefits both in the spine and in the femoral region. So there's, depending on the individual, there's definitely a spinal impact as well as a femoral impact, which obviously is very important. And going back to what you were saying early on, Dr. Hoffman, it's a bone quality benefit. So the biomechanical nature of the device, because it's laying down new bone following the sort of point of loading, so the individual standing on the plate being moved up and down. So the cellular effect is actually aligned with the trabecular structure in the bone. So you're getting a formation of new bone in line with the weight-bearing, load-bearing skeleton. So it's not just putting bone in a haphazard way. It's actually putting it into the trabecular structure along the lines of loading, which again is very important to the quality of that bone and improving the durability of that new bone.
Well, this is a good point at which to pause because, as you listeners know, we divide these podcasts into two parts. And in part two, I want to talk about a fascinating dimension of the Meradyne LivMD story, which is its linkage to NASA research. We're all caught up in Mars frenzy these days as the movie The Martian is being released, and we've now discovered that Mars may be more habitable than we think, with water sources near the surface. But one of the most daunting problems associated with long-distance spaceflight is, unfortunately, osteoporosis, because in a zero-gravity situation, there is very rapid bone loss. So we'll talk a little bit about that with today's guest, Ian Cutts. He's a vice president for Meradyne LivMD, and the website www.livmd.us or www.meradyne.com. Please join us for part two of today's Intelligent Medicine podcast about low-intensity vibration for musculoskeletal health. I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and this is Intelligent Medicine.